Thanks for coming in out of the cold. Nice and warm in here though, isn't it? Okay. So we've been on a journey. We first started off with defining marriage, defining sex, the whole sanctity of it. And then we moved into, the second use of marriage and why marriage is important first from a creation and Trinitarian standpoint. And then we moved over into that second use because of lust. And then we traveled to the understanding that when lust happens outside, when taking care of lust happens outside of marriage, then we start going into all the different deviations. And so if there isn't a sense of sanctity of marriage, then the sanctity of sex goes out the window too, because lust moves people into all these various situations. Just think about what you would do. What if you followed your lust all your life, and that's all you did was follow your lust? You'd probably be dead if that's all you did, right? But so there's always the deviations in lust outside of marriage, and that's when we start moving into our problems. And we talked about the 6 P's sexual revolution and the whole birth control thing, and we basically have come to the point where you're pretty much 99% if you do things right regarding the birth control pill, and I'm not advocating one way or the other. Again, we mentioned that, but we've come to a point where a woman feels free now because she was always the one who took the risk in a relationship outside of marriage, because if she would happen to get pregnant, she has no guarantee that the guy who got her pregnant is going to take care of her, and she always finds herself in the predicament. So the idea that the birth control pill comes around, and if you're pro-abortion on top of that, but let's just take the birth control pill, you got a 99% chance of being free to sexually do whatever you want. Then the woman said, now I have freedom, right? Because I can be like the guy, no responsibility, I can have sex with whoever I want, and the whole sexual revolution that was supposed to bring about sexual freedom, it doesn't, because people are not fulfilled when they just follow their lusts. And then the whole thing about, when we reduce and don't keep in mind the sanctity of marriage and sex, then you can move into what has become the norm here in our society, and that is cohabitation. Cohabitation outside of marriage. And that cohabitation would be, we're just going to cohabitate until, like Dr. Jordan Peterson says, I find somebody better, you'll do for now, kind of thing. Or maybe you've met that person who says, we're getting this, I get this a lot. We'll get married someday in the future, but it's not economically feasible, it's not personally feasible, this and that, I have to get through college, and we want to have a relationship, so we'll just shack up together, and there's a future idea of getting married, which sounds reasonable just from a state of reasonability, but in reality, what are you communicating to that other person? We talked about the nonverbal communication, that if I don't uphold the woman with honor and respect and want to move into a cohabitation environment, and I'm already telling her things just by my actions that I'm not honoring her. And that does get communicated, and you're also, you're in a situation, if you're cohabitating, even by law, not only just how God sees it, but I can escape this thing a lot easier than if I was married to you if things go wrong. And you're already starting like a used car. You're my used car, I'll drive you for a while, and maybe it will last, maybe it won't, but right, the commitment is supposed to come first, the respect for each other comes first, and then the sanctity of sex goes along with it, right? When you honor it, you have that fidelity with each other. But then as the sexual revolution continued, we moved into the acceptance of homosexuality, and now we find ourselves in the whole transgender movement, that it's just a continuing domino effect to where we find ourselves today, where the sanctity of marriage going downhill brings the sanctity in respect of what sex really is supposed to be according to God. That goes downhill. And then we turn to sex with everybody for freedom, and that's not what it is designed for. And now we move into the acceptance of homosexuality and the whole gender thing that's happening now. And it's really breaking down what I started off with. And remember, if Satan can get rid of genders, and I gave you the history of that too, right? The pagan history of goddesses who want both genders. And if you neuter people, then we don't have the female-male sex, the female-male relationship to the Trinity. The fact that God actually made us male for the reason of making one male and a female, and the two will come together and become one flesh and then produce babies. You know, to bring about the family. The whole structure of God has been collapsed. And it's true, right? We all talk about the family and the destruction of the family and what's going on in our society, okay? Last week we were talking about the transgender issue, and for those who weren't here, we showed it's about a half an hour video of a liberal feminist who studied this and came to the conclusion that this whole transgender thing, as you guys remember, it's ridiculous, basically. And she showed us she goes, you follow the money and you can start making sense about what, the medical community, big pharma is doing and everything in regards to, if we can get people to change their sex and start doing the hormones and doing the surgery, there's a lot of big money in that. We're gonna visit that again today with a girl who had a sex change into a guy, and how she says it was the worst thing, it ruined her life. And I'll let her explain it to you. It's very disturbing. And if you've watched the movie, What is a Woman, the documentary, What is a Woman? Anybody? Okay, we watched it. I recommend that for you. Walsh? Matt Walsh did that. Excellent. Okay? So, here we go. The 1960s sexual revolution was a big part of it. The whole cohabitation. Remember I told you what was the percentage? A few percent of the people before the sexual revolution were living together. It doesn't mean they weren't having extramarital affairs and sex and all that stuff, but just the whole idea of cohabitating without the sense of marriage. And then I gave you the 78% of people between the age of 20 and 40, or 20, I think it's 20 and 40, are okay with cohabitation. Okay. Gay marriage passed the Senate, bipartisan legislation. We all remember it was only about 8 years ago. Supreme Court also legalized it. So since 2015, gay marriage is now a part of our society. That's never been a part of any society ever. We're the first country that ever had gay marriage. There was, if you look at the Roman Empire, there was acceptance of gay relationships, and but there wasn't the sense that it equaled marriage. All right, and now we've gone to where we are now. That's where we are now. And this, I came to notice this just in my ministry. I used to say 30 or so, but now it's been 10 years. I've been observing this for quite a while now. But 40 years old and plus, so that would be me. I don't know how many of you are under 40 years old. You guys are. And 40 years, less than 40 years, there's a huge difference in the mentality towards all of this. Huge. And I'm talking about Christians, not non-Christians. We're just more accepting of all of it. Now the gender thing, I'm not sure, there's been a new thing. I'm not sure how kids are looking at that, but as far as the cohabitation and gay marriage and things like that, ask some of these kids. You can ask members of our own congregation. I dare you. It happens here when I talk to them. it comes to me with, and there's a lot of sincerity on their parts. Some of them come up to me and say, Pastor, I get phone calls. I know what the Lutheran Church believes in regards to homosexuality, and they go, and there's this empathy towards the homosexuals, and I understand that because I've dealt with homosexuals, and if you listen to their story and what's actually happening in their psyche, they're attracted to men. It's not something they asked for. Well, we don't have to get into details, but they'll come to me, the young people come to me, and they want me to tell them that it's okay, because they feel for them. You know, so there's a lot of empathy for our young people. And then I have to gear them into, you know, the old talk of, well, you know, when you were a kid and we as parents, your parents knew that something was not a right direction for you to go. You know, what did your parents do? Did they allow you to just go ahead and go in that direction, or in lovingness and sometimes tough love, did they have to tell you you're not going in that direction, or God wouldn't be pleased if you go into that direction? If it's something outside of sex, anything, you know, in regards to morality. But it's very interesting how it has changed. We lost the map, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how you get it back. Maybe we will. But it's very interesting how a person like me sees it versus a person who's not. I had discussions with my kids. Now they're both on the side of that, but I had to talk to my kids about it, and I saw the empathy in them. You know, sit down and say, hey, you know, and there's a concern. Well, what happens to a homosexual? Do they go to heaven? Do they go to hell? What are we gonna do? You know, and I had to give them the whole talk about. And you also have to put it in the context of start off. I always say to people, start off knowing your own sexual sin. All right, and so that you start off not higher than thou when you speak about other people's sexual deviations. There's no one who has a pureness of sexuality, whether you're heterosexual or not. So anything that's impure about you, that's why when we marry, we have our lusts, right? And we have our second use so that those lusts can be managed, right? Are they cured? No, but they're managed. We live in a fallen world. That's the whole, it's better to marry than to burn in lust, right? But we're all dealing with those things, and so you have to move in that direction, and you still don't say that it's right, but you move and you have to address every sexual deviation for what it is. But you always should start with yourself and approach people in humility. And yes, persecution is here, right? I mean, I go out there and talk in the public square about any of this stuff. What are you gonna get? You're gonna get persecuted because you're the minority. You're vastly the minority in the culture today. We have turned into a pagan culture. All right. In 1974, this is interesting. This is very interesting to me. In 74, homosexuality was removed as a mental disorder from American Psychiatric Association. So that's telling you that before 74, in the psychiatric studies in the profession, homosexuality was seen as a mental disorder. All right. Now here's the question you have to ask yourself. When they decided in 1974 that it's no longer a mental disorder, did they do it based on their psychiatric science, or did they do it because the culture was forcing the issue? Which one do you think it is? Culture, all the way. You don't see the documentation on this stuff, it's the culture. And that's exactly what's happening right now with the trans movement. It's very interesting. In 2019, the World Health Organization removed transgenderism from the list of mental disorder. 2019. You think that was because they came to the conclusion that these people are better served through psychiatric health to just go ahead and let them change their genders? Is that psychologically? Is it from their profession, or is it because the culture is mandating it? And then you gotta ask the question, are we helping these people or aren't we? Right? Because before that, it used to be where it was a mental disorder and you're trying to help the person through it. I'm going to give you another statistic in a little bit, and there are lots of kids that go through a phase of thinking themselves as being the opposite sex. And like 90% of them get through it and they're normal. It's just part of your growing up, you know? So what do you know, but they get through it and then they become, when I say normal, a man who is biologically a man that understands himself as being a man and a woman. Even if they're in homosexual or lesbian relationships, they still identify as women and men, and that's an interesting thing. I'm going to get to that. Because some of those people, the people in those groups are getting a little mad, even frustrated about what's happening in regards to the neutering of their gender. Just like I feel a little upset about the neuterizing of my gender. Make sense? But it's because of the culture. Now study the social political trends and ask yourself, which came first, the social trend or the science? Okay? I don't think it's very hard to figure that out at all. Now, this is a case in point. Johns Hopkins Hospital, Dr. Paul McHugh, before 1979, they were doing sex change operations. All right? Now, here's the thing. He looked into he looked and watched the people and surveyed the people who they were doing sex changes with before then. And he was looking at the suicide rate and the satisfaction rate of the people who were going through the sex changes. And he noted that he wasn't helping people. They weren't less depressed. In fact, they were more depressed. And the suicide rate was higher for those people than the persons who didn't have the sex changes and is still trying to deal with those things. So Dr. McHugh said in '79, because of the science, because of the data, he stopped it. Not because of Christianity, not because of the theological implications that we have or the moral implications that we have. But he says, we're not helping these people. We need to go back to psychiatry. Help them. Guess when it was reversed? Now Johns Hopkins, because he's gone, Paul's gone. Johns Hopkins is now in 2016 because of the what? The culture. They've returned to doing it, and you make a lot of money doing it. We're not helping these people, and we don't have all the data because it's so new. But what is your prediction 20 years from now, if we continue on this course, when they start analyzing all the people who have gone through the medical treatment, what are we going to find? I bet all of my money that I have on, you're going to find these people are more devastated than ever. I would bet it all on that.
I already see it.
You're already seeing it. And I'm going to show you an example of one person. I'm going to give you a video of this. Yeah.
Pastor,
Yes.
I know this is a little bit off, but I have heard that there are babies born sometimes with both,
Yes, and we're going to get to that. Mhm.
and maybe that was what he was doing before.
No, he was doing sex changes. He was doing that. And in those cases, you need to do it.
Mhm.
And it's less than 1%. They're giving you 3 and 4%. It's less than 1% of it. It's a very rare thing, and it does happen. And in those situations, we have to do something because you're looking at the genitalia and you really don't know. I mean, look, that does happen. But it's very rare. And in that case, yeah.
I'm surprised that and I think they're just starting to get some lawsuits for minors, but I'm surprised that's not gonna be a major issue for the hospitals, or maybe they've already, made plans to around it, I don't know.
I wonder, yeah. Yeah. And that's when I reminisce back when I was young. And I can remember in our Christian groups, and I'm thinking, I always think of Dr. James Dobson, because that's who we were watching, Dr. James Dobson, and all. He was the big guy, and he said, our society is on a slippery slope, back then in the 80s, okay? And boy, oh boy, was he ever right. All right, now we're gonna start getting into the terms, all right? LGB, all right, lesbian, gay, bisexual, right? Those are what those terms mean. And this is interesting. They help to promote the T, which is the trans, right? But promotion of the T begins to destroy the LBG. You understand what I mean by that? All right, watch. If you're a lesbian, when you defined lesbian before all of this, right? You were a woman, and you wanted to be a woman. You did the things women did, but you were oriented sexually to other women, right? If you were a man, you did man things. You understood yourself as a male. In fact, the point is, the argument that you were making is, I am a male, and I'm attracted to other males, and I should have the right to love whoever I want, and have sex with whoever I want, but there was always the male identity, right? It's going to start eating itself, and this is where my kind of part of my hope is on all this, not to be cruel or anything. But what happens is when a person then says himself, he states himself as being a trans, now he's saying what? Well, he might be a male who now once says, I'm a female. So he's got the male biological parts, and he's identifying as a female. All right? So, let's say I'm a male, and I'm identifying myself as a female. And I find another male who's identifying himself as a female. And we get together. Are we lesbians, or are we, well, no, we're trans. But it starts to then say something to the lesbians, and it also says something to the homosexuals that they don't necessarily agree with, because they still identify with their sex. Now, I'll give you a statistic now that will come back later. Peterson talks about how 80% of people that goes into trans are homosexuals. They're already in that place. So it's almost like they're stepping into the next one. So there's this movement towards not identifying with the sex that you are. But you find homosexuals who do male things and they don't dress up as a female, they see themselves as males, right? And same with the females. But now what you're having is a blurring of the lesbians and the gays. Not only the heterosexuals, but now the lesbians and the gays. Does that make sense to you? Okay? So if the transgender gets its way, LGB does not exist. Now the B is bisexual, so that's somebody who has attraction toward, a male would have attraction to both males and females, and females would be attracted to males and females. Right. All right. Let me go, in this last line, it's very interesting how this always happens, but things that are not moral or things that are evil will destroy itself. So I'm going to just, here, transgender, just give you a basic definitions here. Transgender, relating to a person whose gender identity does not conform to the sex assigned at birth. Make sense? Then there's the Q, the queer, is a sexuality or gender identity that does not correspond to established heterosexual norms. That's a much more umbrella term. They're not so easily defined. They're just, when they say queer, if you look at the term queer before queer became queer as it's stated now with an identity, that term queer was always somebody who was not like normal, they were queer, right? Intersex, now here's what you're talking about. Now intersex is being born with reproductive anatomy that does not seem to fit the typical definition of male and female, and that's that less than 1% person that does have a medical problem, and that has to be resolved one way or the other, right? Then there are the asexuals. Asexual is one who does not experience sexual attraction toward individuals of any sex. Now, what do you think about that one? If a person's walking around and they're not attracted to either sex, so they're not homosexual, they're not lesbian, they're not heterosexual,
Still a man or a woman.
they're still a man or a woman, yeah.
Why do you have
So-
to have another term for it?
Exactly. Wouldn't this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I'm just thinking this through. Wouldn't it, from like a Christian standpoint, be how we always say, the vast majority of people want to be married? But there is that 1 out of 100 people that don't get married, and then they don't want to get married. And there isn't necessarily a strong sexual attraction, and so they're very fine being alone. That person exists too. Right?
Wasn't Paul like that?
Huh?
Wasn't Paul like that?
I don't know exactly. Paul could have very well been married. A lot of people would suggest he was married, and then he might have lost his wife or something like that. But what he was so fixed on the gospel proclamation that he says, I wish everybody were like me, because when you're married, you can't devote 100%, you know, that kind of thing. Maybe though, I don't know. But a lot of theologians ask this question. We don't know for sure because there's no documentation. Because he was a Pharisee and all Pharisees were always married, and so that's most people would suggest that he had a wife at one time and not anymore, and then he just dedicated the rest of his life since his experience on the road to Damascus just for the gospel. But who knows?
A lot less struggle with lust that way.
Huh?
You have a lot less struggle with lust that way.
Yeah. You know, in some ways, the asexual person, I mean, they have some advantages that those others don't, you know. My thought would be, oh, it'd be nice to have, you know, sex is a beautiful thing within marriage, and I would hope that for everybody, you know. But for that person who says, I don't want to be married, and I'm perfectly fine.
Wouldn't that be like someone who, you talked about hunger and sex being the two strongest drives?
Yeah.
Somebody that had no appetite for food.
Maybe,
They wouldn't
yeah.
experience any of what you get from food, you know, enjoying
Yeah.
food.
Yeah.
Or the world in that way.
Maybe, yeah. Sure. I mean, how many of you know people who are never married and they seem satisfied?
Mhm.
You know? Yeah. I think of Miss Hockemeyer. She's single all her life and she's like the greatest teacher I know.
But that doesn't mean you're asexual.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And that's where I'm going. I could be wrong here because I'm not saying that people who are single don't have a sexual attraction. I think they do, right? But it's maybe in their life they decided, well, what about a priest or a nun, right?
Made that decision.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they were all asexual. They basically say, I will make that sacrifice, right? And, right. And, you know, if I was single, if something were to happen to Carla, I would then be in a position where I would still have my same drive, but then I'd be in a position as a Christian to have to be celibate, right?
And the Catholic Church have demonstrated that that's not reality.
It's
No.
tough, but there are priests that do it and they can do it, and there's, you know, for their reasons, or nuns as well, right? But then they had the whole sex thing going on there, because they were, yeah, well, let's not go into that. This is always how evil works, and when I say evil, I'm just saying, when it's not, well, it is, in the end, this is Satan's work. Look at Satan's, now here, I'm just giving you a whole, let's go back to the very beginning. Look at Satan's desire to be God, right? Genesis chapter 3. Or even if you look at, oh, Lucifer, how you've fallen, you know. He wanted to be God. So he turned his back on it, he wanted to be God. So what did Satan have to do to accomplish that? Now that God created humanity in his image, which is his greatest creation, all right, so all the angels that did not turn into demons, they recognize that you and I are created in the image of God. We are his greatest creation. And the angels, it says in Scripture, that are secondary to humans. Humans have body and soul, and we're created in the image of God. The angels rejoice when someone converts to Christianity. The angels rejoice. There's no jealousy because we're the ones created in God's image, and they're not. They're living beings that God loves and can make decisions and things like that, right? Can experience love. See how, right? So, but Satan, for whatever reason, as the highest ranking angel, at least on the level of Michael and Gabriel, probably higher, he said what? I want to be God. And so God creates us, and what was his plan? You can't, there's no way you can, it's already demented to say that you or I or an angel could become God. It just can't be, because God is God, right? But what did Satan do? In order to further his demented plan to be like God? Well, Genesis chapter 3. He knew that God told Adam, if you eat, and he was testing Adam and Eve, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will die. Which means if you don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you won't die. Right? Satan shows up, and what does he know? He knows that God made Adam and Eve a promise. And he also knows that if God makes a promise, he what? Keeps his promise. So if he can get Adam and Eve to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God would have to keep his promise, and Adam and Eve and his descendants must what? Die. That's why we die. Now you have the answer, just for a side note, to everybody who says, why would God allow all this stuff to happen? There it is. He's keeping his promise. So all of the ramifications of sin, you see it in your life, and you see it in your society, you see it around the world, and you see it in all that happens to people, even in what happens in nature, right? God had to keep his promise. So when he did that, what did Satan say? Check. Now you must kill, now they must die. That makes me what? Above the humans. How did he get Adam and Eve to do that? He gave them the same idea that he had for himself. So in his demented idea, in order for him to establish his divinity, he has to convince you of the same desire to be God, and he knows it's going to kill you. Do you see how evil works? So he's okay with you dying with the same cravings for divinity as him, but you dying is going to help him what? Promote his self-divinity. But what is he doing? He's killing the idea of self-divinity. He's showing all of us that it can't be done. Why? Because God says, if you disobey me and want to be like God, you will what? Die. And when he speaks of death, he's speaking about eternal death. See that? Do you see how evil eats itself? And the very promotion of evil that Satan is using actually destroys his point about trying to be God. Well, that's kind of what's happening here. This is always how evil works. Look at Satan's desire to be God. To promote it, he must get humanity to think itself as God, so that God would have to keep his promise and bring death upon humanity to legitimize Satan's self-divinity. Now, what was Satan's blind spot? Love. God's love, because then God makes another promise, right? Right off the bat, he says to Satan, after he says, Adam, your life is going to be tough for you. Eve, childbearing is going to, and raising children are going to be like raising little demons. And Satan, you're going to crawl around like a belly, and here's the thing, and Satan, you think you're in bed with Eve now? No, I'm going to put what? Enmity between you and not the man, the woman. Very interesting. There's a whole theological construct for that. But I will put this enmity, hatred, division between you and the woman. So in other words, I'm going to promise something else. And what was the next words? And her offspring against your offspring, and her offspring, singular in the Hebrew, he will what? Crush your head. He'll strike his heel. And we have reference to the cross already in Genesis, thousands of years before it happens. What Satan, because of his evil, doesn't recognize is the love of God that began creation in the first place. And the love of God is that all that penalty of death will fall upon his only begotten Son, the Son of God, incarnate in human flesh. He couldn't perceive that. To the point when Jesus shows up, where is the devil? Tempting Jesus in the very same way he was tempting Adam and Eve. In the wilderness, throughout his life, at the cross, right? The difference between the second Adam, Jesus, and the first Adam, is that Jesus withstood the temptation and atoned for the sins of the world, destroying Satan. It's God's love through his sacrifice. So that his first promise for us to live eternally with him is not going to be thwarted. And that's why we say in the Lord's Prayer, my favorite of the petitions is what? Thy will be done. Because if we know that God's will is going to be done, evil will destroy itself in the end, and he will reign. It has to happen that way. There's such a guarantee in that, and you've got it all displayed in the Scripture, all displayed in the Scripture. Okay? So in this way, Satan's desire to prevent God's furthering of life, procreation, becomes completely divorced from sexuality, which promotes stopping the prevention of life and the promotion of the perversion of sex, and I should add to that, the gendering of the sexes. Right? So what do we have now involved around sexuality in 2023? We have sex for its gratification only, separated from marriage, and separated from procreation as best you can if you want to become sexually what? Promiscuous. Nobody goes out to be, very few people go out to be sexually promiscuous and wanting a baby to come out of it. It's all about the sexual gratification only, okay? So see what's happening? And now we're moving into, and that one part of that lady's presentation, which you brought up, is that whole computer thing, is where they want to basically take the creation of human beings completely away from sexuality. Which we can kind of almost do already. You see where that's going. And then we're moving the genders. Is this making sense how this is working? You see the deviation hitting creation, promoting the lust, and taking the sanctity of marriage and sex to its lowest levels. So just to let you know, the scriptures do speak against this. And for our young people, bring them to Romans chapter 1. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts, even their women exchanging natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also had a natural relation with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind. I think that's what we're doing. You can see that collectively what's happening. Since we've moved from all these stages, is where you can see that we're being handed over to a depraved mind. You can just see it happening. So that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. And then goes on to gossip and other things. Okay. If somebody tells you, and this is one of the things you'll hear, well, Jesus never addressed homosexuality. Well, Jesus never addressed abortion either. In fact, the scriptures don't address abortion by using the word abortion. The scriptures don't say the word Trinity anywhere in the scriptures either. All right? That kind of thinking is a fallacy. Remember Jesus, everything in the New Testament, why do we hold the writings of Paul and Peter and John sacred as scripture and authoritative? Because of what we read in the Gospels. When the authority that was handed to Jesus from the Father, and then Jesus spoke, he spoke his words and they came from God. When Jesus finished his work of salvation and he was about to ascend back to his Father, what did he do? He took his 12 disciples and he turned them into what? Apostles, by breathing upon them the Holy Spirit and then giving them the authority of the church. So the words of the apostles are synonymous with the words of Jesus. So because Jesus didn't say something specifically about it, it doesn't what? Matter one iota. You have in the Old Testament, Levitical law says don't do it. You read that, remember that laborious part of our, when I went through that whole don't do this and don't do that, right? And now you have it in the New Testament as well. So you can't get away from that if you're a Christian. You just can't. All right, you ready for some revelation? All right. Just to give you because the book of Revelation is about, it really is about the entire New Testament period. It's not just about the future. It's definitely about the future, because what it does is it gives you a panoramic view. What's really beautiful about it is John sees these visions, and in apocalyptic language, it can describe to you everything that's happening, like a Rembrandt draws a painting. Or you go to the art museum and you see a painting and it really moves you, right? Or a song, even music, the sounds of music and how it may move you, right? There's something about it. So that's the beauty of, say, a parable or poetic language in the Bible, or apocalyptic language. And the apocalyptic language that John uses here speaks in big time generalities here. And I'm going to just read you a part of it because, and I'm going to try to, not so I don't take too much time. There's these beasts. How many of you read the book of Revelation? There's these beasts, right? One of them is the dragon, the woman and the dragon. Let me just read some of it. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars. Numbers mean something. 12 always means the church. It's a number for the church. 12 tribes, 12 apostles. She was pregnant and cried out in pain. And she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven. An enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns. It's very interesting, the word crown. There's 2 Greek words for the word crown. This one is not the holy one. This is, there's 2 words for it.
Political crown?
Oh, it's I wrote it down here. Diademata. It's a diadem, as opposed to the other word that I can't remember. It's not a holy crown. It's not the crown that God wears.
Like a political crown?
Yeah, yeah. On his head. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child. What kind of image is going on in your head right now? The moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. Oh, the scepter of Judah. Or it's right with the book of Genesis. A lot of this does. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of in the old days. So the child, who's the son, being birthed from the woman, who some would suggest is Mary, but many suggest to be the church. All right? So the woman, and that, I think the church makes a lot of sense, because remember, if you look at this thing holistically, you've got Eve, and the reason why she's a woman, that she would bear the child, the feminine, right? And she gives birth to, and you go through the whole history of the woman giving birth to, right? You'll have Eve giving birth to Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills Abel. Then Seth comes along, and Seth becomes the lineage to Jesus. Well, then the rest of the book of Genesis, you'll see the lineage coming through Abraham, Isaac, on and on, the 12 tribes. Boom, boom, boom. You go through it, and the Bible will do that. So it's most understood as the church. So the son is born from the church, from ultimately, in the end, the Virgin Mary. And what does Satan want to do from the beginning? Well, think what kind of stories in the New Testament are reflections of the dragon trying to kill Jesus? What's the first one during this Christmas season? Herod, yeah. And that reflects the Old Testament Pharaoh who killed the babies. But Moses was saved and snatched. This is the beauty of Scripture. This is the beauty where you can do this all day long. You can make these correlations, because in the Old Testament, the New Testament is concealed, and in the New Testament, the Old Testament is revealed. And Satan always continually went after the Son, tried to kill him. Well, they finally did kill him. Satan did, the dragon did. The most evil thing that ever happened was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And the same thing, it was one of the most holiest things that ever happened, if not the most holiest thing connected to the resurrection, because God wanted to atone sins for the whole world. Isn't that interesting? And then what happens to the church? Well, Satan is going after us too. So we are what? Well, God takes us and moves us into a wilderness, reflecting the book of Genesis, or actually the book of Exodus. When the church was freed from Egypt, and what did they do for 40 years? Wandered around. Well, this is our wandering here. Okay? So that's reflective. So that first beast is the devil, and all his works, and all his ways. Okay? You get to the book of chapter 13, and I'll try to be a little bit more brief, but this is like a Godzilla movie. How many of you like watching Godzilla movies besides me? The beast comes out of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, pretty similar, right? With 10 crowns on his horns, and each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast the power. So the first beast, Satan, gave the second beast the power. I'll make a long story short. This is reflective of the governments, the anti-Christian government, or anti-God government ruling establishment that exists on the face of the earth. And you can start with Rome if you want. You can talk about all what ruling kingdoms have done to the church and how it became authoritative to do so, and the whole persecution of the church and so on and so forth, okay? So that's the beast, the first beast. Now the second beast is something I wanted to talk to you about in more length in one of my sermons when I quoted a couple of sermons ago, or I forgot when it was, the Sparkle Creed. Remember I brought up the Sparkle Creed and how many Lutheran churches, part of the ELCA, are, that's the most abominated thing I've seen, just in their, this day, using common new terms of our culture and putting it in there to promote all of this garbage that's going on. That's what you call the apostate church. I suggest they're worse than the first beast because they proclaim to be speaking for God. All right? You know, if you speak for yourself and say, I speak for myself because I want to be God and I just want power and do that establishment, they're not speaking for God and they don't normally do. They're speaking for themselves and they want power, right? Okay, that's bad enough. But if you're part of the beast, if you're part of the church, that's why this theology is so important. If you're part of the church and you're proclaiming another type of God, one that's binary, wow, you're doing more damage. Watch this. I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and by the way, you can see this. This is the thing. The culture is promoting all of this, and you have the church promoting it. There's a good part of the church that's promoting it. The Sparkle Creed people are an extreme example of this, right? This other beast coming out of the earth, he had two horns like a lamb, right? But he spoke like a dragon, right? Like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Does that make sense, right? He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf. And that's exactly what happens. What do we say? What does the apostate church do? It always follows suit of what the culture is doing. It doesn't make it up. The culture promotes its ways, and then it's the part of the church that goes along with the culture. See that? It exercises what the first, and watch, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. So it's the apostate church who's making its people worship not God, but really ultimately the first beast, which is correspondent with the culture and all that's being promoted, right? To where there are people who are finding themselves in situations where if they get a gender wrong and that person wants to make a deal out of it, you can find yourself in a lot of trouble. You can lose your job. A lot of people that's happening to now, right? And you know the persecution that's happening in other countries, including Canada, and it's coming our way too. So there you have the panoramic view right there in the book of Revelation. And you can see it happening. It's so clear. Right? So the first beast is, the second beast worships the first beast. The first beast, Satan, is directing the powers of the world. And the old church is very interesting. The church is always the last one to move too in their false doctrine, but they are catering to the second beast who caters to the first beast. Oh, and this, by the way, is she's the whore of Babylon. There's a part in the scriptures in the Revelation. She's got her wine, and that's the abominations. And she prostitutes herself on the beast. That's another part you can read, but you get the point. And this is where I say I need Buzz. I need Buzz, the greatest theologian that ever walked the face of the earth, even though he's a made-up creature. Because he says what? It's not going to win. Evil never wins. It can't win. And I need to always go back to that. Who's in charge, right? All right? Jordan Peterson, that Canadian psychologist, 80 to 90% of children who are having gender identity problems settle into their gender. This is a social outcast group that isn't going to work itself out. What he means by this is he's getting to the point that a lot of these, now that we're telling children that you can change your gender, right? If you just let them grow up, this is not gonna be a problem. Look at the damage we're doing to these kids. What's gonna happen 10, 20, 30 years from now when these kids find out what society, how the medical community messed them up? Where are they going to find their recourse? Where are they gonna find justice? 80% of those who move into transgenderism are homosexual already. So there's already the deviation that happens. And then moves over, it continues and moves over into transgenderism, not by all of them, because it's really interesting to hear homosexuals getting upset with the trans people. And so on and so forth.
Pastor, I think of it as an addiction too. An addiction never gets enough. So it's like any other, whether it's drugs, it goes from very light drugs to harder drugs. It goes from soft porn to harder porn. It goes from, homosexual to transgenderism to even animal, sex and all this other stuff. It always is never enough.
It's never enough.
It's never enough.
That's
I
right.
don't know what will come after that, but it's.
Right. That's an excellent point. Yeah. Because what is an idol? An idol is a good thing that you turn into your God, right? And that God is never going to produce what the real God does. So in the end, if you become an alcoholic, you're going to drink yourself to death, or you're going to what? You're going to have to break that, and not, alcoholics are just going to have to make, I'm not going to drink anymore, period. Right? But that extra drink, another drink, it's the same thing. Sex addicts or all of this, yes, and you don't find them happy. All right? Go ahead and look at the statistics about how often homosexual couples stay together and what's their separation rate compared to heterosexual, which isn't so good either, but it's worse. And then when you look at how satisfied are you? People who have multiple partners. Well, you read it. I think Jordan Peterson mentioned it, the more partners you have, the less true intimacy and enjoyment of sex you actually have. Well, human, just thinking about from your lust angle, you would think that it would be exactly the opposite. So your point is very well taken, yeah. But if it's within the sanctity of marriage as it is supposed to be, right? Then it's a blessing. Yes?
Well, I've kind of observed that I think there's like two kinds of transgenders. There's like true, like people that have, sexual deviations or whatever, but I think there's also becoming, groups of younger people that transgenderism is becoming cool, and if anybody that's outcast,
Yes.
because we're a victim
Yeah.
type society, so the transgender is like at the bottom of the list. So if you're already like an outcast, or you don't seem to fit in, well, if you join this transgender class, then all of a sudden then quote unquote society
Accepts you. Yes. Yeah.
lift you up, or they're gonna give you their highest praise. It's not gonna change anything, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just one of those things that if there's so many people that wanted to be transgender, you would have seen that throughout history, and you don't see that. You see, historically, there's only like 1 to a couple percent
Yeah.
of homosexual sexual deviation, and now all of a sudden,
It's vogue.
there's
Yeah.
40% transsexuals, and it's
Right.
like, that doesn't happen.
No, that's absolutely right. They're being right. Yeah. Absolutely.
It doesn't happen.
All right, I gotta do this video. I hope this works. Now I'm gonna show you a video. And this is sad. This is just plain sad. It's gonna bother you.
I never fit. I was an alpha female, a sales executive that kind of just didn't fit in any box. when psychologists or somebody that I was in love with or whatever said that I was in the wrong body, I started to think, well, maybe I am. I'm a biological woman that medically transitioned to appear like a
Thank you.
male through synthetic hormones and surgery. I will never be a man. Is it transphobic for me to tell the truth? Why is it that a couple hundred years from now, if you dug up my body, you're gonna go, yeah, that was a woman, had babies?
Can you tell me about the procedures that you had?
I've had 7 surgeries. I've had 1 stress heart attack. I've had a helicopter life ride with pulmonary embolism. I've had 17 rounds of antibiotics. I had 6 inches of hair on the inside of my urethra for 17 months. Nobody would help me, including the doctor that did this to me because I lost my insurance. I get infections every 3 to 4 months. I'm probably not going to live very long.
Was there any real discussion of the risks and side effects?
No, there's not. And I know that people want to think that there is, but there's not. The truth is that medical transition is experimental. We have studies that said that medical transition helps mental health with kids. They've all been retracted, modified, changed. But the only long-term study tells us 7 to 10 years is when transgender people are the most suicidal. After surgery. But that's transphobic to say.
Puberty blockers, which are completely reversible and don't have permanent effects, are wonderful because we can put that pause on puberty. It's like if you were listening to music, you put the pause on and we stop the blockers and puberty would go right back to where it was. The next note in the song just delayed that period of time.
You can just pause puberty
No, you can't.
and then pick up
No, you can't.
in the future.
No, you can't. How many studies do they have, long-term studies, on hormone blockers with children? None. For the first time in history, a marginalized group has a huge dollar sum on the top of their head. Every child that they convince is transgender and in need of medical transition, it generates $1.3 million to pharma. And we believe in a pharmaceutical company, Lupron, hormone blockers, reversible, so they say. Well, the truth is that in 2003, Lupron was sued and deemed a criminal enterprise by the US government. They paid the most fine of any pharmaceutical company at that time, $874 million, wrote a check.
Is Lupron chemical castration?
Yes. We're giving it to pedophiles, aren't we? We're giving it to people that are dying. And we're giving it to kids, telling them that they were born in the wrong body and it's completely safe. We're telling children when they haven't fully developed that all you have to do is medically transition and you fit in. I was one of those kids. It got me at 42. Your child doesn't have a chance.
What do you say to parents? A parent comes to you and says, my 8-year-old son is telling me he's a girl.
They're great. You're going to have them do an experimental procedure that creates the most suicidal ideation of any other population 7 to 10 years after, transition. And here's what I tell parents. You don't have the right to medically transition your child.
Can kids consent? Do you think kids are capable of consenting to
No,
this?
they're not. Being a parent is loving the hell out of your kids and helping them see around corners. We have 5 children's hospitals in the United States promoting that.
What?
That's a phalloplastic, that's a bottom surgery. We have 5 children's hospitals in the United States telling girls that they can be boys at $70,000 a pop in a surgery that has a 67% complication rate. That will kill me from infection, that I can't sue on butchering a generation of children because nobody's willing to talk about anything. I have 3 kids. At the age that they're doing this to kids, I'm not transphobic. I love my kids, and I love other people's kids, and you should too. This is wrong on so many levels.
Scott Nugent was a successful business sales executive named Kelly King, a top performer who earned various awards and recognition. However, at the age of 42, Scott made the difficult decision to transition. This parent of three suffered numerous medical complications and near-death experiences during the process, and is now using the horrific experience to warn of the dangers to parents who are considering their kids for transition. So Scott joins me right now. Welcome.
All those complications. She's still trying
My comment is, they really did a good job. Yeah, he may have all those complications, but that woman looked like a guy.
Yes,
I mean, a lot of them don't.
Right.
A lot of them you look at and like, that's still a woman, or that's still a guy,
Yeah.
you know? That one looked like a guy.
Isn't it a shame that so many times now, when you see a person, you have to debate, well, is that a man or a woman? It's sad. I mean, just in general life, not specifically, that you don't know who you're dealing with.
There was a Saturday Night Live, probably 20 years ago, where that was kind of a skit, that there was a girl that was made up to look like a guy or a girl that would just look like anybody's old aunt or uncle, and you couldn't tell, and skit, well, you had to be kind of careful, because you couldn't say, you know, he or she, but it was funny, but now you can't do that, because that's
Right.
hateful.
Yeah, remember Flip Wilson, anybody? Remember, he would dress up as a,
Wanda.
And what was his real name? Burl.
What was her name?
Milton Berle.
Milton
Mr.
Berle did
Russell
it
was a
too.
woman.
Yeah, yeah.
Monty Python, everybody did it.
Monty Python has
Shakespeare,
something. on it.
Shakespeare, all the actors were all men.
Monty
so-
Python is now no longer.
Playing on PBS anymore.
Well, the old Bud Light commercials with the ladies' nights and the guys all dress up like girls to go get
Cheap beer.
free beer. Full circle.
Can't do that one
Well,
anymore.
they do, well, it's funny how Bud Light did that.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why did he show his arm? What?
I don't get with that one. I find it
I was watching a program on a Christian radio station, it was a black gal, do you remember her name? Star? Star? And she was saying that they take pieces out of the arms to make penises.
Oh. Take what?
That's what he was showing his arm.
His arm was like all skinny here, and the other one was pretty.
Right, okay.
know that.
All right. This idea is, okay. This is just another way of looking at it. This idea is that biological sex, which separates female, right? XX chromosome versus XY for the male, is purely psychological. This is their argument, you know. So have you ever been told to breathe deep and slow your psychological response to breathing? You know, that's good advice, by the way. If ever I'm nervous, I'm gonna take a nice deep breath and let it out. It calms me down. Gender can therefore be subjectively chosen. If this is so, why bother with cross-sex hormones and gender-altered operations? Is my first question. And the second question is, does that mean that somebody who is anorexic thinks that she's fat? She does. Every time she looks in the mirror, though, she looks like a skeleton. She thinks she's fat. What do we do? Liposuction or put her on a diet? Because she thinks she's fat. She's not fat. Would we all agree there's something psychologically that has to be dealt with? Look at Karen Carpenter and all of many other people. They have that and they need help. And I would suggest all these people need help, right? Because it's something psychological or mental. This is what happens when subjective replaces objective reality. Now, the objective reality is they're being butchered, and the objective reality is coming. Because this is not going to solve their problems or make them feel better about themselves. And here's the condition of intersex, to your point. It's extremely rare. It is an objective biological condition, though, okay? It is a it starts biologically, a condition. And decisions have to be made in medical procedures are performed. This is not the same as a person with the biology of one gender with a fully formed and healthy sex organ. Alright. With the sexual revolution and birth control, we must also look at modern day feminism, which we'll do next week. We're a little early. Any points you guys want to make? We have time.
What do you think about mental health and lack of faith having to do with some of these issues?
That's a really good question.
I feel like there's a lot of people that if they don't have that faith or their church to go back on, more people seem to have identity issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that those that, if their parents maybe have their own mental health issues as a child, or didn't feel like they were taken care of in a certain way as a child, then that morphs onto their children, letting them, let's explore this to the nth degree. If you say that you're a boy even though you're a girl, let's do it whatever we can, because maybe I didn't get that treatment when I was young by my parents. And it just snowballs on itself.
Yeah, so you could say it's a result of sin that gets passed on, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely true. That's one of the main reasons why we are addressing mental health here. And we've been a part of that, and why we have Jill on board as our part-time. And it's working out really well, because we're all messed up to one degree or another. We all have mental problems. There's not anyone of us that don't. For instance, I get a lot of members of our congregation who, because of an abusive father, actually an abusive father can very quickly turn for some people, bad relationship with your father tends one towards homosexuality.
Correct.
Because they never got the love from their father, and then they're looking for that, and that's part of the reason why their sexuality goes in that way. There's psychologists who tells me that. I know the one that I work with at the seminary, he said that's exactly right. So people are born, you can be a male and more feminine or masculine or female, or there's that variance in there too, so it's both, But the thing that you get more often than not is people who are having a time they can't really comprehend the grace of God because of their abusive father, who he could never live up to, he could never satisfy his father throughout his life. And so and this is just one example, throughout his life, his father never showed him love, never showed him acceptance. Or I have a lot of people who have siblings who were the favored, and because they didn't get the same treatment as their sister or what have you, they are very insecure about themselves, because we all want our parents' approval, how important that is, and if you don't get it, and that's going to affect you, and that's going to affect you with your kids, and it's all part of it. So I would say this is extreme what's happening in our culture, but us as a church has to understand that many of us are anxious, depressed. We all get depressed and anxious, all of us, but statistics show that 1 out of every 5 persons that come into our church to worship, and this is the thing that kind of blows my mind a little bit, makes me wonder, because they could be labeled clinically depressed, however they label what that is, which means they come in, and a lot of people will come into the church setting, and for some of us, it's a very comforting thing to walk into church. For others, I have to walk into all these other people who are so much more righteous than me, who understand the gospel so much better than me, who seem to have their lives in order because on a Sunday morning, we're all on our best behavior. And then they're walking, coming from home, I don't know what happened at home, and they're walking in, and church becomes, for some people, a very hazardous, a very unwelcoming thing, just because of what they're thinking about themselves and how they were treated by other people. If any people get bullied, there's bullying that happens. That's a real thing. And a child gets bullied at a young age, that's gonna affect them tremendously, okay? So that's why what the Lutheran Foundation is trying to do, and I'm on board with that, is that we're addressing, is that we have to get rid of the stigma of it, right? And if I see somebody going through some mental disorder that is very noticeable, you know, again, I have to start with myself. And, you know, if you put myself or yourself, I don't care how you may show yourself as all together, none of us are. And so we have to do this with compassion. I think this has everything to do with bearing one another's burdens, as the scriptures say. And an overall fault. That's why we come to church. We're battered people coming here to receive the gospel again. Because I need to hear it over and over again. Because out there, it's a rough world out there. Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point. Yeah.
You know, this reminds me of the internet and Facebook and how people look so perfect.
Yeah.
I thought, you know, that probably makes it worse for somebody who already is questioning themselves, and then they see people on media that look like they have it all together.
Right.
You know, you don't see the parts where the meat was burned and the kid isn't good, and
Right. Yeah. There are a lot of single moms struggling. And, you know, I was dealing with that today with a single mom. What she's going through. Yeah.
So a lot of this, when you look at nurture versus nature, you know, whether you're born with attributes or whether it's the way you were raised, but I mean, kind of like general consensus of what everybody said, it sounds like there's maybe a lot more case for how people.
Environment.
How
Yeah.
people.
I usually side more on the environment side. I know genetically people are predispositioned. I think we've gone overboard, because, you know, like alcoholism is another one where I understand I know people that you watch them and you can tell they're more prone towards addiction. You just see it, you know, where you watch them, even if it's like Coke or something like that, and they'll have 4 or 5 Cokes when you get one. And that does exist, and it's a predisposition, but at the same time, we've gotten to the point, for instance, I just, going back in generalities, thinking about couples where there was a couple and one of the two married couples was an alcoholic. And that was ruining their marriage. And I had to personally correct the wife of the alcoholic, because she was just convinced that it's not, he has no responsibility here, which is purely genetic completely, and this is because of how he was born, and he can't help it at all. I don't think that's true, and I think we've swung that pendulum to where, you know, it's gonna be, you know, so there are people who have to come to the conclusion that I can't do that anymore because you've turned it into the idol, or you just can't. But it's not all genetic, and I think sexuality is the same thing. And they say that the relationship with your parents also helps you to identify your sexuality, and wherever you have problems within your sexuality. They do all that. There's all kinds of studies out there. I'm not an expert in it. We don't, it's kind of this. Didn't we as parents pass on genetically the sin to our kids? Right? So we gave it to them. And at the same time, what do we do with our kids that are filled with the same sin that we are? We try to what? Help them navigate their life, and they're going to have their challenges. So, hopefully we'll create an environment that helps them, but there are a lot of families where the environment doesn't help them, it hurts them, right? And then all along you make decisions, and you find people that have a terrible family life, they go through hell on earth, and then somehow they start making the right decisions, and they're able to tell you about that. And then they have their testimony of how they got out of whatever it is that was their vice. Yeah, it's one thing for sure, I think, hopefully we all agree, is that these people who are in that situation, they need help, like they used to do. See, we're not as compassionate as we used to be. We're just letting them go on with their thing and say, you'll be happy if we could just help you in your delusions or your fantasies. Back in the day before, we actually tried to help.
It's because the government does everything anymore for you. I mean, think of when the churches used to be the one that helped people with food and this, and now it's the government funding it.
Right.
I mean, they rely on the government.
Check out San Francisco now, and all these cities where they said, well, you know what? Instead of trying to stop people from taking the drugs, we'll provide them clean needles. So, we'll provide them clean needles. Now you got your tent cities going on in these cities, and all these poor people on drugs trying out. You see what's happening? It's all over. So, yeah, it's tougher work to help somebody. You know, first you have to identify that something is wrong and something is right, as opposed to just feeding the wrong and thinking that if you go on that course, you're gonna.
Somebody has to get their hands dirty too. It's like real easy for society to just give money or do something long distance, but when you really help somebody, it's kind of messy. I mean, people are messy.
It's like punishing your kid.
And
It punishes you too.
Yeah.
When you have to punish your kid.
Yeah, but you look at it long term, I mean, because we've had to deal with that, and it's long term, it's worth it, but yeah, the short term is painful.
Yeah.
Messy.
Yeah, our gospel lesson from this last Sunday, God, Jesus welcomes them into heaven, and remember what he says? Blessed are you because you fed these people, and gave them water, and helped them out of prison. And what was the question? I mean, how did the people respond who are entering into heaven? When did I do this? Right? Isn't that interesting? That is so interesting. They didn't say, yeah, I remember when I did that. I remember that guy I fed. All right, I'm in. No. Now all of a sudden it's works righteousness. But they said, when did we do this? And then what did Jesus say? When you did it to the least, and not only the least, but my brethren. Jesus is saying, my brother. And you did the least thing to the least of these. And the reason why you're asking the question is because opposed to those who are the goats, you're not saying, when did we not do this? As if to say, I'm a really good guy. When did I not? When did I fail? Right? Where the other is saying, no, I'm a failure. When did I help? When I look at my life, when did I help? Well, in those moments of faith when you did it to the least of these. And I think a lot of that is when people get in and get dirty and help people. All right. Well, let's pray and we'll see you next week. You ladies, feminism's next, so this is the scariest part coming up. Dear Father, we are a mess, all of us. If it wasn't for your grace and mercy, we would all be going in the ways of our lusts and our self-pride and self-divinity. And it's only because of your intervention that we're able to stand here today and see the wrong, and also recognize that it is only by you, through your Son, Jesus Christ, that we have been saved from the darkness. I just pray that we would come to understand this in humility, and also that we would invoke our church to continue to spread the gospel in its purity, and that those people who are suffering from gender for you and are being led by the culture, that you would help, that the church would intervene, and that we would seriously consider what it is that we're doing and change course for the sake of those who need a change, especially the children. We ask that you